There's a moment most people have never noticed happening to them. You're in a room. Someone asks you a question, simple, direct, maybe even friendly. And before you've finished thinking, something takes over. You start explaining. Not answering. Explaining. I know it probably seems like, and I'm not saying I have all the answers here, but I think if you consider the context, it makes sense that I watch the other person's face in that moment. Not hostile, not unkind, just gone. Here's the thing nobody tells you. The harder you work to be believed, the less believable you become. The more you explain, the more authority you quietly hand to the person you're explaining to. And the most unsettling part? The people who never do this, the ones who answer cleanly, who let silence sit, who never seem to need the room's permission, they're not colder than you. They're not more arrogant. They've simply understood something about power that most people spend their entire lives failing to see. By the end of this, you will too. Before we go further, a quick test. Think about the last time you said sorry for the late reply in a message. Or opened a sentence with "this might be a bad idea," or spent 5 minutes explaining why you were 12 minutes late to something that didn't matter. If any of those landed, this video is about you. There's a pattern running quietly through most people's communication. It doesn't feel like a pattern. It feels like courtesy, like maturity, like being considerate. It's called compulsive justification, the reflex to explain your choices before anyone questions them, to preemptively defend decisions that haven't been challenged, to narrate your reasoning to people who didn't ask, as if you owe the world a continuous account of yourself. The friend who texts, "Sorry I've been quiet. Work has been insane, and my sleep has been off, and I haven't been myself." No one asked. The colleague who prefaces every idea with "this might sound strange, but," before presenting something genuinely good. The partner who arrives 20 minutes late and spend the next 10 constructing a legal case, traffic, the phone, the timing, the unforeseen sequence of events, as if the goal isn't to get home, but to be acquitted. Here's the distinction worth making. Honesty would be "I'm late. I'm sorry." What most people do instead is something else entirely. And here's what makes it so invisible. It feels virtuous. It feels like emotional intelligence. Like you're being considerate of the other person by giving them context. But trace it back. Trace it past the behavior, past the habit, past the social performance. And you find something much older than consideration. You find fear. Because this pattern didn't develop in adulthood. It was built in environments where approval wasn't guaranteed. Where the wrong move could change the temperature of a room. Where explaining yourself was, quite literally, a strategy for staying safe. Your nervous system learned that lesson early. It never got the memo that the danger passed. So it keeps filing reports. To your boss, your partner, your friends, strangers on the internet. An imaginary courtroom that never adjourns, never delivers a verdict, never lets you go. And the most striking thing? Most people have no idea how often they do it, or how loudly it speaks on their behalf. Here's the belief that makes this so hard to break. I owe people an explanation. It feels almost inarguably true. Explaining yourself is respectful, transparent, emotionally intelligent, proof that you care about how your choices land on others. That belief is costing you more than you know. Because here's what no one tells you about unsolicited justification. It doesn't communicate respect. It communicates anxiety. When you explain yourself without being asked, you're not offering the other person information. You're offering them something far more valuable, authority. You are implicitly saying, your opinion of this decision matters more than my confidence in it. People feel that signal. Not consciously, not in words, but somewhere below language. The listener registers a shift in the room, and they respond to it. Think about how status works in any social environment, ancient or modern, boardroom or living room. There is one consistent rule. Low-status individuals explain themselves to high-status individuals. Never the reverse. The intern explains why the report is late. The CEO does not explain why the meeting was rescheduled. The new employee justifies their process. The senior partner states the outcome. No one teaches this. It's absorbed through years of observation. It's felt in the body before the mind catches up. And when you over-explain to someone who has no formal authority over you, a friend, a partner, someone you just met, you are unconsciously placing yourself in the lower position, organizing the hierarchy for them, handing them a gavel they didn't own and possibly didn't want. But there's a second mistake people make, and it's subtler and more seductive. They confuse self-justification with vulnerability. Real vulnerability is specific, chosen, offered to someone who has earned it. It says, asterisk, here is something true about me that I am choosing to share with you. Asterisk, compulsive justification is none of those things. It doesn't choose. It leaks. And what it's seeking isn't connection, it's reassurance. It wants someone to say, asterisk, you're okay. You did nothing wrong. Asterisk, that's not vulnerability. That's a verdict. And every time you go looking for one, you're confessing something important. You haven't reached your own. To understand why this pattern runs so deep, you have to go back, not to last year, not to the last difficult relationship. Further, to the very beginning of how you learn to be loved. Attachment theory, developed by John Bowlby, describes the strategies we build in early childhood to stay close to the people we depend on. When those early relationships were stable, consistent, warm, we developed secure attachment. We absorbed, at a cellular level, that we were acceptable as we were, that we didn't need to perform to belong. But when approval felt conditional, when love came with asterisks, when a parent's warmth fluctuated with your behavior, or their mood, or expectations you were never told about, a different strategy emerged. Anxious attachment. And one of its most defining features is over-explanation. Because if approval isn't guaranteed, you learn to work for it, to manage impressions, to preempt criticism by explaining yourself before anyone thinks to criticize, to keep the relationship intact by demonstrating constantly that you are reasonable, justified, worthy of continued acceptance. That strategy made complete sense then. The problem is it's still running now, in your office, your relationship, your text messages, decades later. And here's what makes it almost impossible to stop on willpower alone. Justify yourself works, briefly. The moment the explanation leaves your mouth, the threat alarm quiets. You feel better. The anxiety dips. So your brain files that away as a solution and reaches for it again next time. But you haven't resolved anything. You've borrowed relief against a debt that keeps compounding. Because the belief underneath, I might not be enough, is still intact. The anxiety returns. And next time, you explain again. It's a loop. And here's the part that makes it invisible. The loop feels like connection. You're talking. You're sharing. You're being open. It must be working. But beneath the surface, something else is happening. Every unnecessary explanation moves a small piece of psychological authority from you to the listener. You're not just sharing information, you're creating a judge. And every verdict you wait for, whether it comes or not, confirms that the court is real. Robert Cialdini's research on influence found that perceived confidence, not competence, confidence, is one of the strongest determinants of how people receive and respond to us. It shapes how much weight your words carry, how seriously your presence registers, how much people lean toward trusting your judgment rather than second-guessing it. Over-explanation is the single most effective way to erode it. Because what confidence communicates, stripped to its core, is this. Asterisk, I have already reached a verdict about myself. You are welcome to your own. But mine is not contingent on yours. Asterisk. You've met people who carry that quality. You remember them. They didn't explain themselves. They didn't soften their edges or apologize for taking up space. And this is the part worth sitting with. You believe them more than the person who gave you every reason you could have needed. Why? Because they didn't need you to. 2,000 years before psychology had a name for any of this, a man named Epictetus had already mapped it. Born a slave in ancient Rome, eventually freed, became one of the most quietly radical thinkers in Western history. Taught philosophy in a small room, owned almost nothing, and the entire architecture of his thinking rested on a single distinction. There are things that are up to us, and things that are not. Our judgments, our intentions, our choices, up to us. The opinions of others, their reactions, their approval, not up to us. He wasn't being cold. He was being surgically precise about where human suffering actually comes from. Because if you spend your energy managing things that exist outside your control, other people's perceptions, their verdicts, their approval, you are doing something more than wasting time. You are abandoning yourself. Every moment spent trying to engineer how someone judges you is a moment your own judgment has been suspended. And Epictetus would name that plainly, not a moral failure, not a personality flaw, a philosophical error. You have confused what you can control with what you cannot, and built your behavior on that confusion. But bring in another voice now, one whose ideas cut differently. Jean-Paul Sartre. Sartre's argument was almost the inverse of Epictetus. Less about discipline, more about terror. He argued that we are radically, almost unbearably free. That there is no fixed nature we were born with, no predetermined self we're waiting to discover. We are what we choose. Every day, in every small decision, we are authoring ourselves. And he had a term for what happens when we refuse that freedom. Mauvaise foi, bad faith. Bad faith is the act of pretending you are not free. Letting someone else's judgment become the frame through which you define yourself. Surrendering the authorship of your life to an external audience. Now apply that to compulsive justification. Every unsolicited explanation is a small act of bad faith. Not because transparency is wrong, but because what the explanation is actually doing is allowing someone else's potential judgment, a judgment that hasn't even been delivered, that may never come, to govern your behavior. You are writing your own trial, arguing both sides, and submitting your existence for a verdict from a court you convened yourself. That's the question Sartre leaves you with, and it has no comfortable answer. Who gave these people the authority to judge you? And when, exactly, did you sign that contract? Let's bring this out of the abstract and put it somewhere you can see it. Two candidates, same qualifications, same role. The first walks in and says, asterisk, I know my background isn't the most direct path to this position, but I think, and I hope you'll agree, that what I've built still translates, even if it's not the traditional route. Asterisk, the second walks in, makes eye contact, and says, asterisk, I've spent the last 4 years building something adjacent to this space. Here's what I learned. Asterisk, same information, same person almost, but the first candidate is asking for permission to be taken seriously. The second one has already decided they are. The interviewer feels that distinction before they've consciously registered a single word. Now consider something closer, a relationship. Partner A comes home from a night out and explains the restaurant, the conversation topics, why they didn't text from the table, why they came back later than expected, why they know it probably wasn't ideal, a complete and comprehensive account delivered to someone who hasn't asked a single question. Partner B comes home and says, asterisk, had a really good night. I'm tired. Asterisk, which one reads as more secure? Which one? And notice how strange this is. Generates more trust. Not partner A. And it's not because partner A did anything wrong. It's because the explanation itself carries a frequency. Something the listener registers as guilt or anxiety or unspoken need, even when none of those things are present. The innocence of the explanation doesn't cancel what the explanation signals. One more. Think about someone you know who changed their life at some point. Their diet, their habits, their social circle. And think about the version of that change that arrived with a disclaimer. I'm not trying to be weird about it. I know it seems extreme. I just read this thing and I'm not saying everyone should. Now think about the version that didn't. The version that simply showed up differently, made different choices, offered no apology and no defense. Which one seemed more like someone who actually believed in what they were doing? The pattern is the same in every case. Power doesn't announce itself. It doesn't preempt criticism or file defensive reports. It doesn't need the room's agreement to know its own mind. It simply acts, and lets the act be enough. So what do you actually do with this? Not a list of techniques, not a script you memorize. Something slower and more honest than that. The first move is awareness, and only awareness. Before trying to change anything, just notice the reflex. Notice the moment before the explanation leave your mouth. There's a small window, sometimes less than a second, where you can actually catch it. What does it fire? With whom? In what kinds of rooms? Because that pattern, if you follow it honestly, is a map. A map of the specific places in your life where you've quietly handed your self-worth to someone else for safekeeping. Not because you're weak, because you're human, and that strategy once worked. But you're allowed to reclaim what you lent. The second thing to understand is the difference between explanation and justification. From the outside, they look identical, but they come from completely different places. Explanation serves the listener. It offers context that genuinely helps them. It's given because it's useful, not because you're afraid of how you'll be perceived without it. Justification serves the speaker. It says, please don't judge me, even when the words don't. The listener feels the difference in their body before their mind names it. Start noticing which one you're offering. That question alone will tell you more about yourself than any personality test. The third practice is the hardest and the simplest. The full stop. We're trained culturally, socially from childhood to soften statements, to trail sentences with qualifiers, apologies, preemptive concessions, to fill the silence after a thought with more thought. Try this instead. Asterisk, I can't make it. Asterisk, that's a complete sentence. It doesn't need a because. It doesn't need a sorry in front of it. It doesn't need a list of circumstances that led to this outcome. The silence after a clean statement is not a void you are obligated to fill. It is presence. It is what it sounds like when someone has said exactly what they meant and trusted to stand. In the long game, because this isn't a quick fix, this isn't about becoming cold. Some of the most powerful communicators alive are also profoundly warm. But their warmth is chosen. It isn't performed out of fear. They're not warm because they're worried about what happens if they're not. The shift is internal, quiet. It's the slow work of relocating your center of gravity from other people's reactions to your own considered judgment. That's not arrogance. It's the difference between needing the room to confirm your reality and simply living in it. Go back to that room one more time. The candidate across the table, working so hard to be believed. They weren't dishonest. They weren't incompetent. They weren't even wrong about their qualifications. They were afraid. And fear, when it speaks, has a very specific sound. Not threatening, not loud, just unsteady. Seeking, leaning slightly forward, hoping someone in the room will push back and say asterisk, no, you're fine, you're more than enough. Asterisk, that's what justification sounds like to everyone around you. And here's the reframe worth carrying out of this. The need to justify yourself is not a character flaw. It's not weakness. It's not a sign that something is broken in you. It's a strategy. One your nervous system built at an age when you had no other tools, in conditions where approval genuinely determined your safety. It served you. It protected you. It kept you connected to people who mattered. The question isn't whether the strategy made sense. The question is whether you still need it. Because most of the time, in the interview, in the relationship, in the meeting room, at the dinner table, no court has been convened. No verdict is pending. The trial exists entirely in your own mind. You're the prosecutor, the defendant, and the judge. And you've been running the same case for years. The moment you dissolve it, the moment you stop filing reports to a court you appointed and never had to obey, something shifts in how you occupy space. Not because you become harder, not because you care less, but because you finally stopped asking for permission you were never required to seek. Power doesn't justify itself. Asterisk, it doesn't explain. It doesn't apologize for existing. It doesn't wait for a verdict before deciding what it's worth. Asterisk. It simply is. And here's the question I want to leave you with, because I think it deserves more than a few seconds. Think about the last time you explained yourself when nobody asked. What were you afraid would happen if you hadn't? That answer, whatever it is where the real work begins.